Welcome, everyone. Are you all comfortable? Well, if you are, I am probably about to ruin that, so I do apologize in advance. Have you ever heard the old idiom about getting hit by a bus? It's pretty much the same thing as saying you suddenly aren't here and now somebody else has to do all your stuff. But before we get started, I do need to say I'm not a lawyer, so please don't take anything I'm about to say as legal advice because I am most definitely not qualified to give that to you. The laws in your areas may be different about how they handle your belongings after you pass away. I'm just going to share with you some of my thoughts about how I'm going to keep my family, or I plan to keep my family from being stuck with handling all of my stuff after I'm gone. So let's go. You've been hit by a bus. Now what? So I'm sorry to say, but you really can't do much for the rest of this story. But what about the people that you've left behind? Before we get into this, who am I? I'm probably like a lot of you. I'm a DBA and a programmer. I've been an avid online gamer for about as long as both of those former things. I've been with my wife for almost 35 years, and I've been a professional geek for about 20 of those, and an amateur geek for the rest of those years, including this. What this means is that pretty much I have accumulated a lot of geek stuff. I could probably curate quite a nice collection in the International Geek Museum if such a place actually existed. My wife is a school teacher. She knows very little about computers. Mainly that's because I've always been there to fix when they break, or to even point her to the right cable to plug into another monitor or whatever. I've left her a bit unprepared for me not being there to help. So who am I not? Once again, I am most definitely not a lawyer. I've never even played one on TV. I've just read pretty much probably more than is really good for me, and I simply have too much stuff. So, death is really hard to talk about. But since we all deal with it someday, it's better to have a plan in place now than to just leave it to your survivors. Unfortunately, about two-thirds of Americans don't even have a will. And it's definitely easier for you to get your ducks in a row than it will be for your survivors to figure everything out after you're gone. Especially since we've become such a much more digital society. So, given the audience, I'm guessing that many of you have a very similar origin story to me. When I was young, I started playing with computer stuff. Then, as I got older, I added a programming career onto my playing. Being the geek in my house, I was responsible for routers, networking, computers, Wi Fi, and even setting the time on the VCR. And the tech moved on. Security became much more important. And as I got older, I started to get more curious, or according to my wife, geekier. Um, Basically, I have a fairly significant digital footprint. So, what is this problem? Why is this problem? Let's take a quick look at some stats. As of a couple of years ago, the current world life expectancy is a little over 73 years. Sadly, these numbers may have changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but this is where they stood until recently. In the U.S., which ranks about number 46, that's about 79. In the UK, it's about which is at 29, it's almost 82. But then in Hong Kong, which is number one, it's a little bit over 85. Now, this doesn't mean that we should all just move to Hong Kong to gain a few more years. It doesn't quite work like that. So you might think that you've got a ways to go and you don't need to worry about it yet. But there are plenty of things that will try to keep you from reaching that average. Your chances of dying in a plane crash is about 1 in 11 million, which is quite a bit better than falling off of a ladder, which is 1 in 2.3 million. But apparently beds are slightly more dangerous than ladders. Um, or say you've been out all night, maybe drinking, then you come home and you hop in the bathtub. You've got about a 1 in 685,000 chance of passing out and drowning in the tub. And then there's the actual bus. That's about 1 in 1/2 million. But then we get into the more likely things, like car accidents are roughly 1 in 8,000. And since we've all been impacted by the current pandemic, as of last September, if you catch COVID, it's about a 1 in 679 chance. It's probably better now, but then there's also the really big ones. Cancer, well, you've got about a 1 in 5 chance. and then a heart attack is about 1 in 2.5. But even if you run off to a tropical island to live out your days in peace and tranquility, thinking that you'll be safe, there is still roughly a 1 in 250 million chance that you'll be killed by a falling coconut. I'm not sure if this will increase or not if you're in the migratory pattern of European or African swallows. I'm really not sure. But basically, stuff happens. However, one thing is for certain. Your chances of living forever, as of today, that's pretty much zero. You definitely want to have a plan. So, in business, a continuity plan is basically a document or a set of documents that details how the business will continue to operate after a disaster. These practices can apply to your household too. Modern people have a lot of stuff, but most of us also have a tremendous digital footprint, and our lives have been designed to make it extremely difficult or even possible for someone else to get into. In addition to wills and trusts and advanced care directives or whatever else you have, you also need to plan for your physical assets, but you also need to plan for your digital assets. These may be things like social media accounts, email accounts, bank accounts, shopping accounts, or cloud storage accounts. And then you also may have your cryptocurrency accounts, or there's a bunch of other accounts that you may have. That's pretty important, especially for people like us, geeks, because we typically have a fairly significant digital footprint. You'll want to make a list of these things that you need to keep track of for your survivors. It will definitely make their job a lot easier. Now, for a couple of personal anecdotes about when I've had to help with a recently deceased loved one's stuff. Um, Ellen is my grandmother. She was born in 1927 and came from an era when there just simply wasn't much of a digital footprint to be had. In 2002, she was house sitting for my dad while he went out on a cruise, and she thought she was having an asthma attack, so I rushed her to the hospital. A couple of hours later, the doctor came out to tell me that sadly she had actually had a heart attack and she had passed away. Organ donation is pretty time sensitive, so he asked me what I wanted to do. Since she hadn't indicated on her license, and she also didn't have an advance directive. I had simply no idea. I couldn't track down my dad. I couldn't reach out to my aunt or my uncle. I couldn't find anyone who knew the answer to such a personal matter as organ donation. So the decision kind of fell to me. That was a pretty horrible place to be in. I had to go with what I thought were her best wishes. Fortunately, I was correct. But then we had to clean out her house, and that was the same one that she had lived in since my dad was a little boy. She had no will, and she had a whole bunch of physical stuff. Very little of it was organized. It took after about 6 months of cleaning up, we pretty much abandoned the effort, and we ended up having to dump a whole bunch of her stuff. Without a will, her estate essentially had to go through probate, and the little bit that she did have was divided between her three kids. During the cleanup, we did find a burial policy that nobody knew about, and we were able to work with a deal with the funeral home to stay within a budget. And that was primarily because we also found that she had pre-purchased a burial plot and markers, which we also didn't know about. But we found her stuff. We also found some memorabilia from my dad's childhood that would have been lost, but the most interesting of things that we found were her marriage certificate to my grandfather and her high school diploma. We knew that she had dropped out of high school to marry my grandfather, but none of us ever knew that she apparently went back to night school 25 years later and graduated the same high school the same year that my dad did. Um, if that was all digital, it probably would have been easier to find eventually, but we would have had no clue to even look for it. We just accidentally found it. That little bit of family lore is likely something that would have been lost. But then, on the other side, Brett. Brett was my best friend. He was also a fellow programmer. He was the lone manager of the National Cold Fusion User Group until he made me the co-manager a few years before he passed away. He was only a couple of years older than me, and he passed away very unexpectedly in about 2015. I still had a chat window open with him from the day before. He was unmarried, he had no family in town, and his father came into town to help clean up his physical assets. But he knew nothing about the digital stuff. Brett, being a programmer and a fellow geek, also had a pretty significant digital footprint. He had his own home lab set up. He had a bunch of networking gear, a couple of computers running some web servers, a file server. He also had a media machine, a couple of media machines, and a few small electronic projects that he had been working on. Since his dad pretty much didn't even know where to begin with that stuff, I helped out. After transferring the user group and all of its attachments over to myself, and after probate cleared, which was another headache, I helped his father recover what I could from his computers, including some of the legal and tax paperwork. Brett and I had also previously discussed an interest that he had in Bitcoin, way back in his early days. I knew that he had messed around with mining some, but as far as I know, I don't know if he owned any. I did find a little bit of evidence, but I'm not sure. He never told anybody if he did own anything. And if there was anything, it's gone. There's no way for us to. There would have been no way for us to access it at the time for his dad, and since he didn't tell anybody or didn't leave any information about it, we didn't have any evidence. We didn't have any knowledge of any keys that he had or anything. So it was just lost. When his father ultimately had the estate sale for him, I did buy his computers. Um, and pretty much as much of the other tech stuff as I could, primarily because I didn't want any of his data falling into anybody else's hands. I disposed of the hard drives and cleaned up as much of his stuff as I could. I wasn't really involved with disposing of much of his physical things, but I did help with his digital estate. He had no plans and he had no information left behind. And honestly, it's not really something that I'd be thrilled to go through again. So a couple things that I learned. Uh, Primarily, both of those passings were completely different. But really, the first thing I learned is that the death of a loved one is pretty stressful. So it's tough to think about things that need to be done. And that's why prep and checklists are really so beneficial. It just takes that much more off of people having to think about what needs to be done. Digital stuff can also be lost very easily, especially if there's not someone familiar with computers to help. And if the digital stuff is found, like any cryptocurrency that we may have found, it can be extremely frustrating if that stuff can't be accessed. It may be tough, but it's really not a bad idea to leave a trusted person with login credentials for your more important things, or at least tell them how to access your password blocker, like LastPass or 1Password, which you're using, of course, right? So and now with more of our our personal lives are in digital format. There's a fairly large potential for identity theft. Unfortunately, there are plenty of ghouls out there who are more than happy to prey on the vulnerabilities of a grieving family that really isn't paying that much attention. So you want to also watch out for them. And then with regard to the important stuff, just let someone else know about what your wishes are. I mean, you really don't want your survivors to have to rely on luck to find stuff they didn't even know what to look for. Kind of like a high school diploma. And if you share responsibilities for secured asset, like maybe a user group or something, let others know how to maintain that asset or to keep it going in the case that you're not there. And then please, please, please tell everyone in your circle what your final wishes are. You really never know who will have to make snap decisions at the end. And organ donation or burial or cremation preferences are a pretty big deal. And you only get one shot to choose correctly with those. One thing that I am certain of, though, is that neither of these people would have wanted us to go through the trouble that we went through. But let's take it back to the geek side of passing away. There are some things that I realized. First off, I'm a geek with too much stuff. Um, I run several critical services at home. Um, these are things that my family probably doesn't care about too much as long as they're actually working. Things like routers and network devices, servers and computers, and the other stuff in my house. I have a NAS that has a bunch of family pictures, some legal documents, and other stuff backed up to it. I'm also the one who set up Netflix and Amazon Prime, Hulu and Disney Plus, and HBO Max, Spotify, whatever. It's all in my house. I also built our Plex server and transferred a ton of our DVDs onto it. So then there's the other critical things that actually are critical, like online banking and how to pay bills, how I get paid or how we get paid, what insurance I would have, and then our home security stuff. And then I also have several other geek things that to me they're important, but probably nobody else really cares about. But things that I prefer that would not be lost. I have some domains and websites that need to keep being paid for a little while, at least. I'd like for my blog to stay up for at least a little while. And the same thing with Twitter. I really that one though was really more of a vanity thing. I haven't really done anything very wise over there. But there's also several things that I'd like for my loved ones to know about. Um, I hope that I've taught my family some pretty good cyber hygiene. I'd really hate for them to get themselves hacked or to open themselves up to easier hacking. I also hope that I've done a good job of teaching my family the importance of password lockers. Hopefully, they would continue to use them. And then, especially after recent COVID work from home time, I have some work stuff that needs to be returned, like a laptop. Um, I don't want my own stuff to accidentally get sent back, but I also want to make sure that my company gets what's theirs. Even for something as simple as books that I've loaned out or that I've borrowed, they should go back to their original owners. Plus, there's a bazillion other things that I haven't mentioned, and that's why I'm trying to put all this stuff together now. And then there's the extremely non-critical stuff that nobody will miss, but it still needs to be dealt with. So, and this is where my own home lab starts to come in. There are a bunch of things that interest me. And I've set up various systems in my office that only I use. I found that Raspberry Pis make it extremely easy to hoard stuff. And this is probably where my wife finds out how much I've actually spent on the geek stuff in my office. I have quite a bit of gadgets. I'm also fairly new to Docker and containerization. I've played with it several times over the years, but I haven't used it professionally. And there's a lot of hard drive spaces taken up by junk that nobody else really cares about. I've also found that it's a lot better for me to play with stuff at home than it is for me to try it out at work. Home is a much more friendly environment, um, especially to learn, and I'd always like to learn more. Thus, my home lab, or essentially my geek playground, which I'm sure many of you may understand what it's like to have a ginormous container graveyard in your home. So all of this tech is good. All of this tech is good for the techie, but it's probably fairly useless to the non-techies that I'll be leaving behind. So, after I'm gone, will anybody care about this stuff except for me? Really? And what needs to happen if I won't be using any of this data anymore? Some of this stuff just simply doesn't need to be kept. But what should be kept? And who should keep it? And what should be thrown away? Which kind of sounds a little bit like, do I need to get rid of the evidence? And this is the part where I might mention that it might not be a bad idea to have a good friend who's willing to nuke some folders on your hard drive for you. So, I mean, will my family know how to keep the lights on if I'm not there? That's kind of a big one. And did I do enough to teach my family to stay safe in an increasingly digital world? I would really hate for my family to be put in a position of trying to figure out what's important or valuable and what's not, or to get themselves into trouble because I didn't teach them how hostile the internet can be. So, why should you care? Well, I guess you won't be around, so really that's up to you. For me, it's been a gigantic effort to get stuff together, and I still have a lot more to do. Um, I know that I haven't gotten everything that's needed to get. I don't want other people to have to go through that trouble, especially when it would be much easier for me to do it now. So there may also be legal issues involved with gaining access to some of the stuff that they need, or even some liabilities for some of the stuff that I've left behind. When I pass away, it's already going to be a tough time for the people who survived me. So I'd like to make that time as easy as I can for them. And early preparation on my part can definitely relieve some of that stress. So a will is a pretty big step in taking care of the people that you left behind, and it also gets into the highly legal realm. So I'm just going to give you some pointers. Not having a will can definitely lead to some serious headaches for your survivors, like the probate process. Plus, it can take away the control of that you did have of how you want to handle your things. Living trust can help avoid probate, but those are much larger topics than I really have time to dig into today. Also, a will doesn't cover everything. Wills are for physical possessions. The law hasn't really kept pace with our digital world. You can't leave your Facebook account with 1 million followers to someone in your will. There's also a major cybersecurity issue inherent in a will. Um, it's a public document, which means anyone can pull up a copy of your will. Be mindful of what you put in it. Don't write login information or other secrets in your will. Also, don't forget to keep it updated. If your situation changes, make sure to update your will while you can. And also, keep in mind that laws will be different wherever you are. Talk with an estate planner or someone else who can guide you through the legalities of disposing of your estate. So another consideration you should make is what happens if you're only incapacitated but still alive. You still may have to deal with your stuff. So find someone that you trust to handle your important business, and then make sure to tell other people what you want to do. Also, keep in mind that some accounts can be frozen rather than just deleted, like locking down your social media and other online accounts to prevent misuse or deletion may not be a bad idea. And it may be possible to lock down your crypto assets to keep other people from stealing them, but it may also be a good idea to let that trustworthy person sell those assets if the market starts crashing. A long-term incapacitation can have a pretty significant effect or impact on any crypto holdings that you have. Basically, when you do regain your facilities, wouldn't you like to have as little disruption in your life as possible? So, technology has far outpaced inheritance laws. You may have agreed to something without fully understanding that you agreed to it, or you may not actually own the things that you think you do, like your iTunes library or even your Twitter handle. Basically, you own the content you've posted on social media, but each of those platforms has their own license to use your content however you've agreed to in their terms and conditions. So check to make sure that you're okay with how it will be used after you're gone. But at the end of the day, there's likely a mountain of stuff for you to gather. Um, and you'll probably find that there's much more than you realized. So it's really hard to get started on this stuff. I mean, preparation just sucks. It takes a really long time. It's hard to get a hold of some of the info. Organization is never a fun task. Um, and how and where do you store this stuff after you put it together? And then how do you ensure your info is secure after you've collated it? Again, probate is another really broad topic that can cause a lot of headaches for survivors, for any survivors. Probate is essentially it's the legal process of validating who gets your stuff, including the people you owe money to. It can be a great big old hassle, and it may be partially avoidable. So all of this is quite a bit overwhelming, especially if, like me, you have a lot more stuff than you realize. So that makes it very easy to procrastinate because there is always going to be something better to do. But it doesn't have to be done right now. So, according to the African proverb, what is the best way? What is the way to eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. Basically, the more you get done, the less your survivors are going to be stuck with. So, is it likely that the bus is actually going to hit you? Not really. But is it likely that your survivors are going to be in a tight spot if that bus does come around? Absolutely. Being prepared will help the people who remain behind after you're gone. So here are some resources that I've found to help you prepare for your departure. The first one, which is a fantastic resource, is Christy Lemaire's checklist for end-of-life disaster response. Um, that one has some really good crowdsourced information, and it's geared towards the tech person. She did a great job with this one, and she mentions several things that you may not have thought about. Also, there's a book, In Case You Get Hit by a Bus, which is a fantastic book that has a lot of good information for people living in a modern world. And it's not just gear for techies, and it doesn't just deal with your tech stuff. It deals with getting all of your stuff together. And now there's also the personal internet address and password logbook. Now, normally I'm very strongly against writing down logins and passwords, but this is a pretty great resource to leave behind for the non-technical person in your life. Just make sure that you keep it secure, lock it in a safe or something. There's also 1Password is the one that I like. There's also LastPass and several others. You can use this to securely store your login information for the various websites or any other um, login and credential information that you may have, or personal private information that you may need to store securely. This application does it pretty well. Just make sure you share the main password with somebody that you trust, or give it put it somewhere that somebody can find it, just not in your will. So there's also Quicken Willmaker. Quicken's been around for quite a while, and there's estate planning software. It's pretty thorough. Then there's Mint.com, which is a very excellent, and it's also free financial tracking software. Does a really good job of keeping tabs on what you have and what you owe, and where your money is. There's also Credit Karma, which is another free resource. It helps you keep track of of the recently deceased loved ones' credit information, or it makes it easy for your survivors to get a hold of a lot of very big information of who you are, or who you are financially. Then there's Nolo.com, which this website has a whole bunch of good resources for the do-it-yourself, forms and guidance for wills and trusts, powers of attorneys, and a whole bunch of other documents that you may need. And then you can also just do a Google search. You'll get massive amounts of information from that. And you can, and probably should, contact a good old-fashioned estate planner. They'll be there to help with any questions you may have, and they'll know the laws that apply in your specific situation or your specific location. So thank you again for sticking with me while I've probably made you pretty uncomfortable. I hope that I've given you some motivation to get out and get some of this stuff done. Feel free to reach out to me through email or on Twitter at the address information below. And don't forget to fill out your session evaluation. Thank you very much.